The
Uh-huh.
second half of Azuma's book, I think, gets a little out there in terms of what he's saying, and then there's a large section of the front where he's talking about like otaku and pseudo Japan, and Japan being in sort of this weird positioning compared to America, and that anime owes everything to America. And I'm like, well,
Uh-huh.
yeah, but it feels kind of weird to be talking about this and then going on to like ideas of consumption theory and then to visual novels.
I noticed that a little bit while I was reading it. I was kind of like, okay, I don't know. All right. And then when he got, so we're going to be focused more on the database thing, right, with the
The
excerpt that you
database,
pulled
yes.
out. Okay. And the Galbraith, am I saying that right? Galbraith?
Galbraith is how I've always pronounced it when I've
Galbraith.
met him.
Okay, okay. So there we go. All right. So in that article too, the definition of moe, that's something I wanted to touch on because I would think most anime fans that have, or Western anime fans that have come to know about it, really just associate that with whatever the art style of K-On! Was. So,
Absolutely. I think that's one of those things of that Western fan discourse
yeah.
and academic discourse can have very different interpretations of what words mean. And you see that with Moy, you see that with deconstruction. Deconstruction means something very different in academic discourse than it does in the fan sort of
Sure,
space. And
sure.
even something like anime as a term can mean something very different depending on which level of academia you're talking to and in the fan space. Like, for example, uh, in my academic definition of anime that I use within my thesis, I don't count Miyazaki Hayao or Studio Ghibli as being anime.
I think he would appreciate that.
He does appreciate that, but you would be surprised how often it is that I say Miyazaki isn't anime. And
Hmm.
a huge portion of like mainstream animation watchers will go, "What are you talking about? Of course it's anime. It's animation from Japan. That's what anime is."
We've talked actually a lot about that in the past, mostly going with the opposite examples, of Ruby and Avatar: The Last Airbender and stuff along those lines. But
Oh, of things that are produced outside of Japan but
right,
really emulate the anime
they're
aesthetic.
yeah, they're visual narrative storytelling with a coherent plot all the way through. Like they borrow heavily from anime. They're anime for all intents and purposes. Um, but I like that going backwards because um, oh boy, lost my train of thought. Um, hold on, give me a minute. It'll come to me.
Sorry, man. I'm just writing down some notes.
Yeah, going backwards because the anime industry. Like every time you talk about anime in this kind of, cultural thing with Japan and the otaku, you're really talking about late night TV anime industry. You're not referring to, Shin-chan or something or like I don't know, what's a better
Yeah.
example? Like Pokemon, I guess is kind of on the outskirts or uh,
No, there's a
Cheese Sweet
huge
Home,
difference
Yeah.
between kids anime and the late night anime scene in terms of their production processes, in terms of their expected audiences, and in the ways that they make their revenue a lot of the time.
Hmm.
And if we're using that as a dividing point, then Miyazaki, the late great Satoshi Kon,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
their work would not constitute anime by the definitions of how the anime industry operates through its production processes.
Yeah, they're movie makers, they're creatives. Um, I completely agree. And I think a lot of people are set in that definition, and I don't know why they're set in that definition of Japanese animation, but I think it's becoming less and less relevant in today's
I
day and
mean, the
age.
example that I tend to use whenever I encounter that is that Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, that classic stop motion
Yeah, yeah.
and that stop
Claymation.
motion
Oh,
video,
yeah, yeah.
that was produced by Japanese animators in Japan. And so
Uh,
my
or
question is that I always bring that up as an example of
yeah,
if we're classifying anime as being any animation
yeah.
made in Japan, what do we count Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer as? because what you're then adding is exceptions. And as you start adding these exceptions, you realize that just calling animation from Japan anime is an incredibly
Yeah.
nebulous and kind of flimsy definition.
See, that's a good one. I wasn't. I usually went with Batman the Animated Series. Had some production done, and the Boondocks too. Had a couple scenes done in Japan.
I mean, the Boondocks is anime as fuck,
It
just
is
in
definitely.
terms of its visual style, like the way those characters are designed.
Hmm.
But I'm not sure that any. I mean, there's also an extent to which anyone who already has like this idea of what anime means is going to resist things that they enjoy being defined as anime.
And that's always been my definition of it. Was anime came about as a term to differentiate it from, you can't say I like cartoons and then the other person talks to you about SpongeBob SquarePants and you're like, "Oh, I meant visual animated narratives that are primarily based
Right.
in Japan." That it was a short language follows the usage of the language. So if you intend to mean I want to talk about these things and then the word isn't giving you those things, then the word is wrong or the word needs to change. And that's why you need to create a new word, and that's kind of how anime came about. To talk about Cowboy Bebop instead of the nine cartoons of the '90s. So mm, I don't. I don't want to soapbox this. I don't want to make it like, whoa, you have to, But I think times are changing, and maybe we have to look at that again.
I mean, there's absolutely an extent to which that is true.
So, just to make this clear, this is going to be recorded for YouTube, and you were okay with that?
Oh yeah, that's fine.
Okay, great. So let's open it up, considering we're 10 minutes away. Let's move into the afternoon delight channel over there, get out of this private call, and just keep
Yeah,
talking
no
over there
problem.
so people
Tell
can
you what,
jump
I'm
in.
going to quickly grab myself a glass of water
Sure,
and I
sure.
will be back in a minute or two.
Sounds good. Skyrockets in flight.
So
Sup? Nothing sup.
the big question I need to figure out is whether I'm going to watch Yuri on Ice subbed or dubbed.
Does it have a simuldub? Simuldub?
Yeah, and
Ah,
apparently the advertisement's going to come out 2 weeks after the sub comes out.
oh shit. Yuri on Ice dub.
Yeah, like
Who's playing?
Funimation's really stuffing up the simul
Yeah,
dub.
no
Like it used to be
kidding.
like 4 months or 4 weeks. Now it's like 2 weeks.
Might pay for that. I mean, 2 weeks though. I'm still gonna watch it immediately. Who's the English cast? Where can I find that? Dub cast.
Funimation made a huge announcement of like new simul dubs they're doing.
Well, hmm. Do you see the English voice cast for Yuri on Ice?
There's a link to all the shows that they have, but I'll take a look and see if I can figure out who's actually doing what.
Johnny Young Bosch as all the characters.
I haven't heard him in years.
He was in the Sailor Moon redub.
As Usagi.
Yes, as Usagi, yes. Yeah.
I'm trying to think. I feel like Koizumi might be my favorite voice he ever did.
Ah, he's so good. He's so good.
Because, like, I will say that's one of the few times where, like, just watching that, like, man, I want to punch this guy in the face. And, like, whenever I read the book, that's basically all he's described as is, like, I want to punch this guy in the face.
Yep. Condescending. Just the right snark to it. Yeah.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hey, everybody, this is Simon. You can be talking to us a little bit. Do an official introduction. Oh, you're all being streamed, by the way, just so you know.
Oh, good.
Yep. All 20 people on YouTube are going to watch this. All right.
I think I'll open up the stream so that way I can add up to the number of people watching.
Yeah, I can open up the stream and then get caught in a time loop because I'm also in the stream.
Yeah, we're not going to do that.
Streamception.
Damn it.
So I didn't finish the book.
That's okay. Simon was telling me in the private chat we had before that most of the book is, not particularly focused on what we're going to be talking about anyway.
Cool.
Yeah. Reading Azuma, you have to understand that it's like reading any academic in the sense that you need to pick and choose which parts you're actually going to read, because reading the whole thing from start to finish is an absolute nightmare.
It was actually pretty accessible, I feel. I just didn't have the time.
Oh, he is accessible because Japanese academia has this weird history of academics actually aim their audience in Japan to a much lower level of like ivory towerness, I guess. It's not like reading Foucault. Azuma wrote his work to be accessible to a more mainstream audience.
Yeah, he sort of talked about that too in the preface or whatever.
Yeah, he did.
I don't know. I really don't feel you could pick and choose this because there is sort of a overarching theme sort of going on, and it does build upon itself. Even though I do admit there are standalone parts that really aren't, that you sort of could get in isolation. So I guess I just contradicted myself right there.
It's all right. We'll get there. It's a journey. Okay, we got 5 minutes. 5 minutes.
Yeah, I can't find the cast for Yuri on Ice, so I guess it's just going to be a surprise. But I do know the cast for Bikini Warriors.
Jesus.
I love how Funimation gets awesome titles and then straight up fill. Like, I hope they never change.
Oh yeah, I just found out the title of the English actress for Yuri on Ice. Gilbert Gottfried is doing every single character. I guess they really liked him for his 50 Shades of Grey audiobook.
Did he do that? Wow.
But yeah, they also got, they're also doing Azeta the Last Witch. But then they got some interesting ones. Well, they got Alder Ramen and Joker games, which I don't think too many people like. But they also got Mob Psycho and 91 Days. And Relife and Orange.
All right. So in the green room, while we have 4 minutes, I would want to ask. We have an academic here, and I wanna pop the question.
I do.
Simon, could you give us just a basic overview of what postmodernism is?
The problem with trying to define postmodernism is that it defies postmodernism to give a singular definition.
We got it. I knew it. Okay, great. All right, good. Confirmed.
I'm one of those awful postmodernists who insists everything is complexity all the way down. So I try my best to avoid giving very simplified explanations of things because I realize there's an exception to almost every word that I would have given.
Yeah, from my very, very cursory research into postmodernism, like there's something that spurred this like a couple months back, but I basically looked around the web for a bit. But yeah, it's hard to describe without looking at the primary sources.
So I think, and he mentions it in Azuma, I think the way that I've come to understand it best is sort of for the temporal aspect of just modernism happened and then postmodernism came afterwards, and sort of a yeah. But that doesn't say anything other than it's basically what we want to call this time period.
Well, Azuma makes a distinction between postmodernity and postmodernism.
He does.
And then you've got people like Mark Steinberg, who wrote a really fascinating book called Anime as Media Mix, which is it's not as accessible as Azuma, but I think it's still eminently readable, where he actively avoids using the terms modernism and postmodernism because he feels that there's too much association with art movement in those terms. So he refers to Fordian and post-Fordian economic models.
Ooh. See, that I can get behind because that has some intrinsic value there in those words and can kind of be broken down and described. Yeah, I was guilty of calling postmodernism bullshit. And I
mean, that's certainly a valid interpretation.
I mean, yeah, right. I did a postmodern reading on postmodernism, I think was what I was told. But I don't know anything about it, to be honest with you.
I don't know. I'm more willing to be critical of postmodernism, but then I also tend to get a more modernist perspective. And so postmodernism just is inherently just egregious to me.
I just don't think it means anything.
That's kind of interesting because I feel like most of your readings of anime have been very postmodern.
Yeah. I'm not gonna. Yeah, whatever that means. Sure. All right, we've got 1 minute, so I'm going to go over the rules and regulations. If you wouldn't mind, everybody that is not Simon, please mute your microphones, or I'll server mute you. We are going to let Simon talk for the beginning here. We're going to do a rundown. First, we're going to go over just, the generals about his life and what happened, what brought him to this point where he's studying to be a doctoral candidate at a university, and how he got into anime as well. And then after that, we're going to take some questions, any questions people may have about that. If you have a question during the time period, feel free to write it in the chat, and either me or Simon will, if it's good, ask it, talk about it. After that break, we are going to let Simon talk about his thoughts on the readings and on how they relate to Madoka Magica, and the rest of anime culture in general. And then we're going to open it up for questions. Once again, type a question if you have a good question. And yeah. So Simon, thank you so much for being here, and we really appreciate it. Coming to this small corner of the internet to talk to us about, anime and stuff.
Oh, it's no problem whatsoever. I was quite happy that you approached me after my presentation at DragonCon.
That's where I picked him up, in case anybody was wondering. So my first question is really how you got into just anime in general, and then how you got into higher education, and how you figured that the two could commingle somehow.
Well, when I was about 15, I was really into anime. I was into the local anime convention scene. I eventually became like a committee member on the local anime con. There was drama. I stopped doing that in my undergrad years. And then I kind of stopped watching anime, full stop.
Oh my.
And so I stopped watching anime probably for about 3 years. And then I did my film school degree. And then I decided that I hated making films. So I stopped doing that. And then I did my honors degree, which in Australia is it's kind of like a bridging point between the undergraduate and a PhD, in the sense that once you do your honors degree for 1 year, you can move on to a PhD without completing a master's program.
Oh. So I've heard that the Australian higher education system is a bit different from the rest of the world in that regard. Did you find it, I don't know if you have any basis for American education, but have you found it easy to study in Australia, study higher education?
Absolutely. I think that one of the key differences is that the Australian system forces you to specialize much sooner than the American system. The standard undergraduate degree in Australia is 3 years.
Okay, so pretty early
So
on.
yeah, like I immediately went into a Bachelor of Media Communications. I didn't do a Bachelor of Arts and then spend a year flapping around to specialize. I went straight into film production.
Okay, okay. And then how did you get to that point where you were like, ah man, I'm gonna say something about, the state of anime in Japan.
Well, what actually happened is that, like I said, I had stopped watching anime full stop. And then at the start of 2011, I was looking for something to write about for my honors thesis. And someone came up to me, one of my online friends, and said, "You should watch this show, Mahou Shoujo Madoka Magica."
Ah, okay. And about when was that?
This was like January 2011, so it was just being
Okay.
fan subbed.
Okay. Gotcha, gotcha. And then it would
And so I represent one of the first people who wrote about Madoka Magica in an academic context, because my honors thesis was published at a certain point in time in 2011. So soon after it was released.
No kidding. Oh man, we should link to that
Please
in the
don't.
video.
It's a very
No?
old. It's a
Oh,
very old paper.
it's being
Um,
revised.
and so what happened was that I explored Madoka Magica from a very filmic, analytical point of view. I connected together its genre elements and its story elements to the history of the magical girl, the Mahou Shoujo genre.
Right, and I think that is how Madoka Magica begs to be read, really. That uh, whoop, that I see a lot of people coming to that and not really understanding the show, and then I myself also came to it with a background of magical girls, and I really understood all the genre implications and all the references and everything that goes back to all these other shows that the series requests that you have some familiarity with.
Yeah, absolutely. There is no doubt that Madoka Magica is steeped in the history of the genre, and that's what I really explored in my honors thesis, and it's what I explore for about half of my doctoral thesis.
Oh, cool. So what exactly are you talking about in that regard?
Um, uh,
Like,
sorry, I'm trying to think of how best to connect together these ideas.
oh, is it stuff like the fact that, Mami Tomoe is named Tomoe and Hotaru Tomoe is named Tomoe?
Oh, I don't get that deep into things. I'm more about reading
Okay.
the general plot elements, the character
Okay.
design, how these characters and the plot styles emulate the very, very basic building blocks of the Mahou Shoujo genre.
Gotcha, gotcha. That sounds very interesting and something I would absolutely like to read. Um,
When it gets published eventually.
so I wanted to ask in this segment too a couple questions about formal academia and how much there is a space for what you're trying to do. Have you found it easy to kind of fall into a place in either media criticism or the cultural anthropology that we're going to be talking about later?
Um, Anime studies as a field of study within academia kind of only emerged in the early 1990s. I think it was about 1993 or 1994 that the first English language paper on anime was actually published. And so it's a young field, and it's very much divided between older academics who use anime as another medium for their study. And there's younger academics like myself, academics in training, who are very much coming from a background of being immersed in anime as not quite a way of life, but certainly a very strong part of our cultural consumption.
Right, and I think that's something that got me when I was reading the Azuma thing that, and a couple of the critics that I've read too, like Saito Tamaki with the Beautiful Fighting Girl, was that they kind of see the otaku lifestyle as something that happened, whereas the next generation is born and bred in that way, and a lot of these things that they would point out are taken for granted by a lot of us.
I mean, one thing that you sort of see in criticisms of Azuma is that he isn't an otaku, and you see that with Saito Tamaki as well. And I think Otsuka, in particular, in an interview he gave with Patrick Galbraith, said that his criticism of Azuma is that Azuma isn't an otaku, and therefore he doesn't understand otaku, which I think is troubling as a guideline for who is capable of commenting on things to begin with.
So would you say you are the first generation that is able to do what you're going to do?
No, I think what I'm doing in particular, I think anyone could do. What I'm doing in particular is trying to open up some of academic scholarship outside of what I see as purely textual analysis.
You mentioned that when we were at the convention, and do you see that much more textual analysis, looking at themes, comparing just the quality of the show versus, looking at the general overall um, industry as a whole?
What you see is kind of a real stark dividing point between scholars who look at one particular text. They'll look at Ghost in the Shell, they'll look at Evangelion, and they will unpack those shows for their thematic value, for their content. For example, there's so many articles on Evangelion that are about, like, the role of the mother in Evangelion, the Christian themes of Evangelion,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Buddhist iconography of Evangelion. It's an endless sort of exploration of what Evangelion is as a TV series. But what you don't see is people then going, okay, so that was the TV series. What about the spin-off manga where the characters are ordinary high school students? What about the mahjong games? What about the pachi slots? What about all the figurines? How do those fit into this very deep analysis of Evangelion as being full of meaning?
Right, and I think that's a field that outside of these three or four works that we've seen so far really begs to be explored, and we wish you the best of luck going for it. So,
So yeah, so to get back to what we were saying, once I finished my honors degree of doing this really deep textual analysis of Madoka, I did the JET program. I taught English in Japan for a while.
oh man, you got in. Oh, I applied, I didn't get in. Not you.
Yeah.
It's hard.
So I did that for a little while, and then I decided to do my PhD. Um, and I realized, and so this had been about, I started my PhD in 2013. I looked back at what had been produced for Madoka Magica between the original series and 2013. And I looked and I realized that we had like tie-ins with the Lawson convenience store chain. We had various spin-off manga, we had figurines, we had all of this stuff circulating. And nobody was really talking about how this stuff interacted with a conception of Madoka Magica as a text. And that's what I decided to focus my PhD on, is looking at this idea of the role of narrativity as being a central point of Madoka Magica and anime media franchises in general.
Cool, cool. So I think that'll bring us to the end of the first segment. We're gonna open it up. If anybody has a question, um, you know, state that you have a question. Just shout it out. What are we doing? Yeah.
I
Hey,
have the text open. People are asking questions.
okay, we're in movie night, by the way, everyone. All right, Phaeton, you're first. Throw it out. You gotta mute yourself, remember.
Okay, so one of the last things you talked about how the other mediums have changed and affect Madoka Magica is actually something that I've sort of noticed before, and it's something I've gotten into some pretty heated debates about, and I'm curious to see what your thoughts on it. Because one thing I've sort of recognized is that when you look at the TV show, how especially like the character Mami, there was really not too much to go with in the 3 episodes she was there. But then seeing how subsequent manga have fleshed out her character, it seems like her character has really come alive later, I guess if we go with the database idea. And so the character has been defined through other media elsewhere, and now people are sort of retroactively applying that to describe what happened before, when if you just saw the first 3 episodes, there was nothing in the first 3 episodes to really give you that depth of understanding. It's sort of like a retroactive writing of a character. Is that something that you sort of see happening with Madoka Magica, or what things have you noticed?
That's absolutely what I see when it comes to approaching Madoka Magica, and I think it's very much in line with Azuma's conception of the database, in the sense that these characters don't exist within one particular context. They don't purely exist within the television series. They are malleable, they are repositionable, and they can be articulated in so many different media formats that the range of articulations then impacts how we read them in other articulations.
Cool. And I think that's a lot of what you're going to be talking about here, and a lot of what's really interesting, particularly about Madoka Magica. So, do we have another question? Cal, do you have a question?
I had one earlier about Eva, but now after I had a question about what you said about the narrativity. What did you say about that again?
I basically just gave the summary of my PhD title, which is exploring Madoka Magica, the production of narrative and non-narrative in Japanese animation.
Okay, because I was just wondering, like, how do you like, because Azuma basically says that the database consumption model ignores grand narratives and stuff. Is that what you're talking about with narrativity, or is that something different?
It's very much drawing on both Otsuka and Azuma's conception of narrativity. Narrativity itself is one of those hard words to define, like postmodernism, where it's got so many different layers and different interpretations. The way I use it is in the sense of when Otsuka talks about narratives as being something that are given value by virtue of the fact that they are not quite fixed, but that there is one particular world, and the narratives we explore within that world are what gives value to media franchises. That's what I'm kind of comparing, is this idea of whether Madoka Magica is valued on the basis of it having a singular narrative that is continually fleshed out, or whether it's about non-narrative, whether it's about character consumption.
Oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. I see now.
I think that was one of the questions I had when reading Azuma, was that, is he advocating here a complete, foregoing of the grand narrative, or just any type of narrative for these moe aspects? Or is he saying that those become less important, or you can have both at the same time?
I don't think he's advocating that view. He's just putting together his observations of it. I don't think he's saying that database consumption is better than the other one that he had, the narrative consumption. He's just saying that, he's observed that. Yeah, go ahead.
If I can jump in, I don't think Azuma is advocating for anything. He's an observer, and he's writing about what he is observing as being trends. The key line that I use from Azuma, from the original book, is when he states that narratives are becoming the same class of merchandise as figurines and coffee mugs, in the sense that they are ways in which character is delivered, but the narrative itself doesn't have a point of primacy as being the sole arbiter of how we consume things anymore.
So do you agree with that?
I think in the case of Madoka Magica, it's very hard to argue that the narrative of Madoka Magica is what gives value to the franchise.
Ah, man, really? Okay. So I'm just trying to understand this better because it was one of the points where I stumbled when reading it. But the fact that it sounds to me when you say that you're discounting the characters as people or discounting the emotional weight of the things that happen to people like Sayaka through the course of this show. It sounds like that you're reducing the story and the plot to just this tool that you use to get the characters across. But I think there's still value in even blindly watching Madoka Magica just to see what happens for the plot.
Oh, I mean, listen, I'm never going to be the person who says that watching Madoka Magica and buying a figurine of Sayaka are the same thing. I think they're very different things. But what I think the key point of differentiation is that both of them are giving you an equal degree of access to Madoka Magica as a franchise. They're simply different perspectives on how that franchise is articulated.
Oh, I think I understand that a little bit better.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's more like overall commentary on like the broader trends in consumption, not like individualized.
So this actually sort of goes into sort of my question, just trying to get a deeper understanding of this, is that looking at what Azuma's take on this like database consumption is that there are cases in anime where I feel he is absolutely right. Probably the prime example I can think of would be Kantai Collection, which pretty much was born, like the entire story and narrative and characters pretty much born out of the fandom. But I get the feeling that is anime such a large genre, such a large media, that this rule doesn't really fit equally well to different like properties, where some properties it's absolutely true and in other properties much less so?
I mean, as with anything, it's complexity all the way down. And I don't think that outside of generality to the point of meaninglessness, you can really say that Kantai Collection is the same as, I don't know, Shinchan or something like that. You can't really say that they're the same thing. What you're really having to understand is that there are systems of values that have altered over time that have led to the positioning of Kantai Collection in the way it has been created.
So, Simon, I want to give you an opportunity here to just either give an overview of your PhD or just talk about how you're taking these readings that we did, or what you're getting out of them, what's right, what's wrong, where you're going with it.
I feel like I don't want to say what's right or wrong about either of these if I'm on the record, but I will give a general overview of things. So what my PhD thesis is doing is it's exploring Madoka Magica as a franchise through an exploration of analysis from its rise from a 12-episode series to the Media Mix franchise that covers everything from film to video game to drama CDs to figurines to character goods to tie-ins with convenience stores and fashion labels. In particular, what I'm analyzing is how this kind of positioning that Otsuka gives of the franchise finding value in its contextual narrative is kind of being disrupted by these non-narrative practices across the broader anime landscape. And I'm also trying to demonstrate the position that Madoka Magica holds in relation to new directions that are being developed in anime culture and industry. So really what I'm arguing is that the franchise's position as a social phenomena, I say phenomena, but in the way that Japan has phenomena all the time, but it isn't being solely based in the narrative complexity of the original series, but is instead being built through distribution of non-narrative text, of images of the series that are consumed, repurposed, remixed outside the context of the original storyline. And the franchise is successful precisely because its narrative and characters can be broken down into elements that appeal to a wide variety of consumers.
Hmm. Okay, and the one that, well, two that really struck me were the image that I posted. You had it in your presentation about the
Oh, with
Madoka.
Earth and Wind ecology.
Yeah, yeah, that they're advertising for these designer labels, and it's just, and I've seen the same thing with like Final Fantasy, where it's these anime characters and they're advertising designer clothing, and of course, why wouldn't that work? But I that struck me as the microcosm, or just the real poignant point where I was like, wow, Madoka Magica is not just what I first encountered.
And I think that's actually one thing that I find really fascinating that I have to bring up whenever I do my presentation is that the perspective that we have in English language discourse and English language fandom is very different based on the issues of translation and distribution than what we actually encounter in Japan.
And what specifically do you mean by that? Like, what gets
Well,
lost in translation?
for example, we don't see any of that fashion label tie-in stuff here because, of course, we don't. That isn't a major fashion label out here, and Madoka Mágica isn't recognizable enough to become a mainstream fashion kind of label, I guess. But in particular, what I think of is the manga, and I use this as part of my presentation in DragonCon. If you remember, you might not. But just showing how. So Madoka Mágica has had about 70 spin-off manga published as of August 2016.
Yeah, yeah, it has.
Of those 70 volumes, 55% are comedic. They're not based on the narrative at all. They use the elements of the series, the characters, and use it to tell stories about the girls as kindergarten students, stories about the girls as high school students without magical powers, stories about the girls as 30-year-old housewives. And so far, there's only been 2 volumes of manga published outside of like adaptations of the original series and films, which actually have any claim to extending the core narrative, I say in the largest quotation marks possible, of Madoka Mágica. And so when we look at that, my question is really, and then you add in the fashion label tie-ins and stuff, is the narrative of Madoka Mágica, of these characters who are psychologically traumatized and killed and murdered and ascend beyond time and space, can we really say that that's what's being valued in these articulations of character?
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's something I want to explore a bit more because it's really a crazy thing if you think about it. Now, I first encountered it when I was reading Beautiful Fighting Girl, and there's this story of, the fan who gets upset over the Dojin works and the fan-made works, and he says, you're ruining this character for me. This is not how this character would act in these situations. You can't betray the character like this. And then he found out he was arguing to the original creator of the work, and she was like, "No, that's how it is." That there's this idea of one character. I always fall back on Rei Ayanami when I talk about this. There's Rei Ayanami who's, the original Rei Ayanami from the plot of Neon Genesis Evangelion, and then there's all these variants that coexist seemingly like clones. Just you have Rei Ayanami that's the schoolgirl that's assertive. You have the long-haired Rei Ayanami. You have all these myriad of Reis that they all can coexist frequently, and they all can share different parts of Rei Ayanami, but they're not all the same dour girl from the anime. And everybody's okay with that.
Yeah, it's and I think that that's like Rei Ayanami in particular feels like there's a reason why Azuma draws so much on Evangelion. Like there's a reason, and it's because Evangelion, despite the criticisms we might have of Evangelion and its relevance in the contemporary era, there's a reason why everyone draws back on Evangelion and the way the characters of Evangelion have been articulated as the initial case study in so many of these postmodernist approaches to anime.
Yeah, I mean, it's Eva. Come on. Yeah. Yep. And what specifically do you want to say about the characters of Madoka in that regard? Um,
What I want to say about the characters of Madoka in that regard is that when you look at the articulation of the fantasies of Madoka Magica that are present within all of these spin-off texts, what you see is similar to what you're talking about there with Rei Ayanami, and it's what Azuma talks about in the context of the moe elements being broken down. Is that the characters comprise of a number of elements, a lot of them visual, some of them like narratively based. But these characters don't exist within one particular context. They are infinitely malleable. You can remove this character from a particular context, and as long as enough of those elements remain consistent, they will be recognized as the same character and therefore accepted as being like a spin-off or another interpretation. And so with Madoka Magica, what you see is that the spin-off manga will turn Homura into, sometimes she's super obsessive about Madoka, like in her adoration of Madoka. Sometimes she gets married to Madoka's younger brother. Sometimes she doesn't seem to care about Madoka at all. But across all of these articulations, enough of her remains the same that you can look at her and say, that is Homura. This is an interpretation of Homura.
so in that way, Madoka Magica built its own database, right? That's what you're saying? That there's some...
I'm actually currently writing the part of my thesis where I talk about the third movie. And I think the third movie
because that's where I was heading.
is-
I was heading to Rebellion. Yeah.
I think the third movie, in a lot of ways, basically openly endorses the idea that these characters don't exist within one particular context and that you can articulate them even within the realm of the official along as many perspectives as you want to.
Okay, because there are so many points in Rebellion where you say when Mommy throws off the towel, when Kyoko and Sakura are best friends, and you're just like, man, this sounds like some sort of fanfic. And yeah, do you think it does that purposefully to make a point?
I think that looking at the way Rebellion articulates the characters, in that I think that on a meta level, you can certainly make that argument, and it's certainly an argument I'm making, that there's an extent to which Rebellion is openly going, oh, hey, this Mitakihara, this version of Mitakihara exists solely within the mind of Homura, but its articulation is still valid because all of the characters remain the same, even if there's shit in there that does not make any sense, really. Like when you start trying to break it down on an Otsukan level of like, logic and context, it really starts to break down. But we accept it as valid because the characters remain enough of the same elements that we look at them and don't think they're anything other than themselves.
Right. The way I described it when we were talking about this in a few days ago was that I enjoyed Madoka Magica because it required a database of anime and specifically magical girl anime to fully operate, and it draws upon that. Whereas I felt Rebellion required a database of Madoka and Madoka fandom to operate, and that's why it struck a raw chord with me. What did you feel about the movie?
About Rebellion?
Yes. How did you approach it? How did you watch it? How did you consume it? Was it from that angle of, oh boy, look at all this fan service, or was it from some other
Um,
way?
well, I actually first watched it when I was in Japan. So I saw it when it premiered at a movie theater. Um, and I was surrounded by sort of hardcore Madoka fans. And so I was really fascinated with sort of taking in the way these people were approaching
Right, right.
it. And I then saw it back in Australia with the English subtitles, which helped because I'm going to be honest with you, sometimes the way they talk in the movie, I'm like raising my eyebrow and having to like double check
Right.
my internal translation. But one thing I really got from watching it was that they were so, there's a degree to which it seemed like they were so desperate to continue the story, despite the fact that the story didn't, pardon
Yeah.
me, despite the fact that the story didn't really need continuing.
Yeah, that's basically what I said when it first came out. I said, why are we doing this? Um, so what was the reaction from the fans then? Was Do you think they were consuming it on that level of I'm Madoka fan, and now I understand these characters as I would understand a fan doujin, or do you think they were looking for something else?
I mean, I don't like speaking on like what people want out of these things.
Okay, fair
I'm
enough.
far more interested in how these texts are produced, but I do collect doujinshi. Like part of my case study is looking at the doujinshi that have been produced and the correlation between the doujinshi and the official manga works. And what you really see is that there's so much correlation between the official and the unofficial in terms of these characters not being positioned within one particular context. The key difference that I see is that where the official will never openly sexualize the characters, the doujinshi openly embrace sexualization of the characters. And I think that speaks to an extent to which the personal fantasy that is embedded within doujinshi is different from what's officially acceptable as being a part of the franchise's branding.
Okay. Are you speaking just because they can't air that on television? Or
I
are you
mean,
saying,
kind of, but then I think about it, and I went to an official Madoka store that toured the country back in
oh snap?
I want to say it was 2013, 2014. And they had like Madoka and Homura body pillows just on the shelf next to other Madoka merchandise. So clearly there's an extent to which the official accepts that these are the kind of fantasies that people are bringing to their reading of the series.
That's crazy. So, so what was your final take on what they did with Rebellion? Do you,
My final take on Rebellion, and it's something that I am currently writing, like I said. So
sure, sure,
please
sure.
please take
No,
some of what I'm saying with a grain of salt. But what I think about Rebellion is that Rebellion really articulates the same elements from the original series in terms of the character is the center point of what is being put out there for consumption, and the world is a flat background element that simply serves to be the stage upon which the characters are presented. Um, and that's what you see in Rebellion is that Rebellion is these articulations of character and its explorations of character, and the world details that do exist are either meaningless or fuzzy or don't really make much sense when you really try and interrogate them.
okay, okay. So speaking of character and character decisions, how do what specifically, or how did you feel about Homura by the end of the film? Was Homura congruent with the Homura that you understood from Madoka Magica? Outside of everything involving, the craziness with the multiple incubators and the whole inside the witch's egg, yeah, none of that.
Outside of the weird narrative construction through which the character is being positioned.
Yeah, outside of the fact that, we got to continue this series and she has to end up villainous. I suppose, did you feel that it was true to what you understood about the characters from Madoka Magica?
it was, to me, it was true enough to Homura's basic elements that I couldn't outright dismiss it as being an ineligible interpretation of the character's elements.
Gotcha. And that kind of speaks to how far you have to take it for it to be confused as, is this Homura?
Yeah, it's really this, like, I think it comes down to the individual on a lot of levels. It comes down to how far an individual is willing to stretch their interpretation of what makes the character valid.
I'm reminded of that artwork where it's all the Madoka characters as Fists of the North Star, I think. The big burly men.
Oh yeah, I have like a Ghost in the Shell Madoka Dojinshi sitting on my shelf somewhere, which is all the characters done in a Masamune Shiro kind of style.
Wonderful. Okay, Temp brings up a good point. I want to shift gears now we're done digging into Rebellion and bring up the third reading that you provided to us. That's Galbraith, and talking about Moe and what that means. Just for anyone that wasn't in the pre-chat, Moe being...
Hold on, people are like, if you open up the text chat, sorry, there's a big debate going on. Someone wants to roll back.
What? Okay. Oh, sorry.
Blake needs to talk.
Blake, talk. This is Blake's time to talk.
Oh, okay, whatever.
Okay. Oh, I mean.
Okay, there we go.
We can move on from this. But it's just mostly my disagreement with how Rebellion was approached, because I feel at least being familiar with the writer himself, the writer of Madoka Urbuchi, everything there seemed to like perfectly align with everything he's written before Madoka. So I feel it was definitely just like a coincidence that it came to be like as an acknowledgement of how the character, the fans interpreted the characters. But I definitely don't think that that read really fits. That it was an acknowledgement of the fans, because it just perfectly in line with what the writer has done of all of his works, the ones I've read.
Absolutely. I'm never going to disagree with anyone's individual interpretation of those things. I personally try to, as best I can when I'm doing pure textual analysis, distance myself from the positioning of the creator. I give them another voice at the table, but I think trying to read Madoka Mágica as an auteurist kind of thing, that Urobuchi's voice is the one that we should give primacy in terms of reading, I think that has its own problems. But I perfectly accept that that Urobuchi is a good perspective, and his approach to narratives in general is perfectly valid way of understanding the text.
So can we go off that? Are you saying then that you can't have an Urobuchi database and then read Madoka Magica as elements pulled out of the Urobuchi database or the Shinbo database, or what have you?
When we start talking about databases, we end up in this weird territory of there are certainly individual databases. I think that the Madoka Mágica has its own database of elements that it draws upon, but it also draws upon elements from the wider database. Really, databasing is to draw on authors who I didn't give readings for, because frankly, I do not want anyone to read them unless they're really deep into academia. Deleuze and Guattari talk about this concept of rhizomes, which is the idea that there's all of these connections underneath the surface. And so when it comes to Madoka Mágica, I think Madoka as a text exists, and it connects beneath the surface to all kinds of other texts of all genres, and you can then connect together. Like, these authors have particular elements that they enjoy using. So, I mean, there is an extent to which we can create a database for Urobuchi. We can create a database for Shimbo. We can create a database for Shaft.
Yeah, certainly. So we want to take a couple questions here. We got a couple lined up.
Absolutely.
The first is Temp. Temp, you're going to have to say it out loud. Come on. Did he leave?
Yeah.
Did he bail? Okay. He's shy. Okay, I'll read Temp's question for him, and then he can deal with it later. How did he, I assume he means Urobuchi or you, I'm not quite sure, draw a discrepancy?
I think he means you, yeah.
Okay, he meant Simon. How did you, Simon, draw a discrepancy between the narrative designed around articulating the characters and affecting it, and traditional characters normally affecting and or being a part of the narrative?
Okay, so I think what he's I think that this is basically the discrepancy that's between Otsuka and Azuma in general, if I'm reading that question right. In the sense that Otsuka's conception of worldview within fiction is that a world exists and any individual text will simply be a line through that world, which offers a limited perspective. And so that's that characters exist within this world, but the characters are simply one aspect of the story that is being told. Meanwhile, Azuma is of the opinion that the characters are the center point and the world kind of gets pushed to the background.
Okay.
And so I think that the difference is that when we look at shows, when we look at series like Evangelion and Madoka and all of that kind of thing, we notice that the characters are the ones that are really driving almost everything about those shows. And the world itself is pushed to the background, or its elements only come up in really brief, small doses. And so much of what comes up in fan discourse surrounding it is invented out of whatever little details we have been able to find.
I like that. I've always liked it, a strong emphasis on characters, so I can deal with that. And Temp says that's a terrific answer. Thank you.
So, for example, I'm going to draw on my favorite example from the Madoka Maker fan wiki,
Okay.
which is, its own thing in itself. But they have an article called Timelines, which is trying to unpack like the timelines of Madoka Maker and kind of create a grand narrative.
I've read this. I've read
Madoka.
this. Yes. Okay.
And my favorite part of it is that they have multiple different theories, and like they're unpacking like, okay, so because Madoka's father is harvesting cherry tomatoes in this moment of the scene, that means that like, cherry harvest season is at this time of year, which means that this is when the series takes place, and based on this, this, and this, and the weather patterns, and like these are what the characters are wearing in the background, and this is what the trees look like. And then it's only like after multiple tiers of exploration on this level that they get to the third potential theory for why the world looks the way it does. And it's just the artist decided that things would look cooler presented a certain way.
Oh man,
I love it that intradiegetic, and then the final one's the
and it's
extra-diegetic.
that. And I think that's like one key element of this, is that there's a desire in a lot of Western fan culture to invent a grand narrative where I'm not sure there is one. And I think that's especially true for Madoka Mágica.
Do you think then that Western fans are more enamored with the idea of the grand narrative, or are some?
I don't want to make I don't want to make huge broad generalities, but I think that fictional media in a Western context has much stronger attachment to creating worlds than it does to what I see as being the trend in post-2000s Japanese anime media, where world is becoming less and less important.
I'm with you. I absolutely agree. And that's kind of what drew me to anime in the first place, was that it was more about the characters' decisions than it was about, how large the world is, or how the structure of the city that the Titans are attacking.
Yeah, my friend is actually doing her PhD on Star Wars fan studies, and the kind of things that she's coming up with like from her interviews with how the fans create this world from details and then connecting together the dots is it's fascinating to me, and it's especially fascinating in comparison to how Madoka Magica and Evangelion have functioned.
So I believe we had 2 other questions lined up. Tom, is your question
Absolutely.
still relevant? Hold on, I muted you because you were typing. Go ahead. I mean, speak it.
I'm open.
Yes, you are.
Okay, so this is a different sort of question. But so, and this is more just a problem that I have more with Madoka specifically. But so, at what point does you're talking about how characters have like all of these different iterations and how they can exist in like different contexts. But at what point does a character become so poorly defined that they can now exist in any context? And more importantly, why do people get attached to characters anyways if they can be so poorly defined that they come down to mostly just a character design and nothing else?
I mean, trying to come up with a reason for why people feel attached to characters is really hard because that's such an individual thing. And I think that any attempt to broadly generalize why people find value in fantasy is going to just encounter so many exceptions, so many subjectivities. It gets hard, but I think in Japan, what you see is a real emphasis on character and especially Yuru Kiara, which I think Yuru Kiara, for those who may not be familiar, is weak character, literally. And it's characters like Kumamon, who is the bear mascot of Kumamoto Prefecture. The town I lived in had 3 different mascots. We had a Kokeshi doll for the town, a dog, a Shiba Inu for the castle, and stuff like that. But these characters can be articulated as long as their character elements are in the same. And you see what happens with Kumamon is that Kumamon is everywhere because Kumamon is accessible. Kumamon is replicable. Kumamon can be put into almost any context you want, including, Kumamon is the mascot of Kumamoto Prefecture. But when you go to Miyagi Prefecture, which is where I did the JET program, you can get Kumamon holding Miyagi Prefecture like goods. So it's Kumamon as a mascot for Kumamoto Prefecture advertising and enjoying products from other prefectures. And I'm not sure like where these lines come in, except in the idea that this character is simply accepted as being something that is malleable as long as his kawaii, as long as his Kiara remains consistent.
And would something like Hatsune Miku like be included in that?
I think Hatsune Miku is very, very similar in that you see how many different articulations of Hatsune Miku float around. You have the winter ones, you have all of these sort of variations on the basic Hatsune Miku design. And they're all considered acceptable and they're all considered valuable.
Okay. So I'm just, a lot of people said that my question was bad, and I understand that because I didn't fully explain myself. So the reason I ask a question like this is because in the typical discourse, both casually and like academically, a lot of and maybe academically, my knowledge of academic literature or of literature academics is pretty low, but like the way that characters are generally considered to become like good characters is by being very well defined, not very undefined. So I think that that's just why I asked a question like that. Is basically just why.
Yeah, that's fair.
I want to jump in here and mention the idea in the readings of the fact that people aren't really connected to the characters themselves, but connected to the elements of the characters from the database that they can recognize. And I think what Tom's saying is that does conflict with the inherent agency that we grant the characters within the narrative to do what they're going to do and make their own choices and to be people. And how does that, do you see any conflict there of reducing these characters to traits and then also granting them the full agency?
I don't see any particular conflict because I think it's all about the context. I think that the characters can simultaneously be disembodied blobs of moe elements and characters in the fullest sense of the word, of having narrative agency and all of that. But they're within specific contexts. They're within individual articulations of character. They don't necessarily extend to the universality of that character.
Right. And people are okay with multiple versions, and there's no conflict there at all. That's how I
think there certainly
is.
can be conflict, and I think you see that conflict in sort of the Western fandom's discussion and unpacking of what counts as canonicity.
Sure.
Yeah, and if I can make one more quick comment, I do actually think there is something of a conflict here. At least I've seen it in the Western fandom, where I know that in a lot of communities that I've been in, there's a lot of focus on things being, quote unquote good, which is not something that is easy to define in any sense, but that people will oftentimes feel a need to, how do I say, like when people get in discussions, they feel a need to defend these characters that are in many ways mostly icons and not necessarily characters in and of themselves. And they see a need to justify them as being legitimate characters in a Western fandom. Am I making sense here?
You're making sense. I do want to drop in here that I'm going to be heading off in about 10 or 15 minutes, so we might need to be fast on the questions.
Right, we're going to move
that come
right
up next.
along.
But yeah, thank you, Tom. I enjoyed your question. I think that there's definitely value in the exploration of Kiara that you were talking about there.
All right, Jiggles, you're up.
It's a really quick one. What, if I may ask, is the name of the doujinshi featuring the Ghost in the Shell crossover?
I might need to get back to you on that one.
Okay.
Although if someone else wants to maybe ask something, and I can grab my doujinshi pile off my shelf and try and find it for you.
Yes, that'd be excellent. Thanks.
All right, I'm editing this order because Phaeton already talked a bit. Gru, you're up next. Gru, you got 5 seconds.
Oh, sorry, I was muted.
Okay.
So my first introduction to postmodernism was through Victor Pelevin's Homo Sapiens. And there's a lot of themes in there, but the one I want to talk about is the idea that there really isn't in a postmodernist society a difference between high art and low art. So paintings and this and that compared to graffiti or advertising, and advertising specifically. And more like, so you look at something on a Coke can, like the Coke logo. It does the exact same thing as art does. It makes you feel something. It makes you want something. And so his argument is that it's just as much art as something you'd find in the Louvre, which I think is really interesting when you think about advertising campaigns and advertising empires featuring characters from different shows. So basically the question is, do you think... Do you agree with the idea that for kind of the media empire that is Madoka, that really when it all comes down to it, the art kind of mashes together in a way that...
The art style in Madoka Magica, I think, is particularly fascinating because of how it blends together very stereotypical ideas of what anime and Japanese animation looks like in the presentation of the core cast of characters, that's then combined with this sort of Russian, Czech, mid-20th century animation style that's brought by the Gekidan Inukari studio. And I think that I look at that stuff as a real, juxtaposition and how that plays into the positioning of Madoka Magica's characters versus world. But I think that those elements are is one of the things that's the least explored in the expanded world. in certain media forms. The manga, in particular, basically doesn't do anything with the discursive animation styles. Everything is presented in the same style. And I think that's almost an opportunity missed in terms of engaging with some of the franchise's imagery.
All right. All right. We're really tight on time, so Hypest, you got the last question.
Oh, he's not even in here.
He's not even in here. What is
Oh,
this?
so to answer the question that came up about the doujinshi in question is called Ghost in the Magica, the Walpurgis Night Laugh.
Sure it is. Okay. And I want to read that.
And the author's name is Orangeberry. So Orange Berry.
Okay, our final question from Hypest. What is your opinion on the current state of publishing of Japanese works, a la manga, light novels, anime, in the US, and our industry's state in being able to translate the writer's intent correctly behind language barriers, and how anime should continue beyond this point to expand into other cultures?
Oh God. Talking about translation is always hard because translation is inherently an act of localization. There are elements in Japanese which do not beget themselves to the English language on some levels. And there are some things in English that don't necessarily translate back into Japanese. And so we have these different levels of concept. I think that any attempt to literally translate from the Japanese into the English is kind of a mistake, because translations that work on a literal level often miss some of the cues, some of the feeling that's really meant to be coming through in the original text, even if those feelings don't necessarily have direct analogs.
Well, all right. Unfortunately, guys, we have reached the end of our time. Simon's got stuff to do, but I do want to thank you so much for coming in and talking to us today. It was really cool, and we really appreciate your perspectives and everything.
Yeah, I mean, I am busy for the next little while writing as I am a PhD thesis, but if anyone is actually interested, I would be very happy for you guys to, maybe we can do this again sometime.
Sure. We're always here. We're always talking, and we'd love to have you back again. So maybe we'll set something up. Now, afterwards, guys, we can stay around and we can talk about it. And, yep. So.
Oh, I am Australian. Yes, I'm from Melbourne.
We wish you the best of luck in your presentation.
Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your night, guys, and I look forward to reading the comments left on the Reddit post.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Also, Sydney is far worse than Melbourne. That's like can we ban this guy, Alden MW? Can we just kick and ban him?
We can ban him.
Hey,
all right, thank you very much, guys. I'm going to disconnect now.
Bye. Who else did I server mute? All right. So anyway, you guys are free to talk now. Show's over.
Well, can I at least say what my question was that you just denied?
Sorry, bro. You got a chance to talk. Not everybody got a chance to talk. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So this is something that I've sort of seen, and I mean, you guys know I'm pretty deep into Kankali, but I can get a better one. I think everyone can sort of understand what I'm talking about for this point. Is how when you have these characters, and like you talk about the harmony between all the various different characters, and it feels the reason all those characters work is because there's disharmony, in which there's a fighting narrative to try to figure out which character is the best of which kind. And so you see the evolutions. It's usually when one person came up with an idea of how a character is, and then people like it, and then it slowly starts becoming, and you see the evolution of characters coming from this database. But to sort of give an example where an anime that actually has something like this was actually in Gurren Lagann. And that point, when they got put into that alternate universe, and you basically see each character basically going through their own different universe, where because we're in this like postmodern era, you can't deny that that could be possible. You can't deny that you can't deny that the characters could be that way. However, because they're different, those necessarily come into conflict. And at the end of the day, while you cannot deny the validity of one of them can easily become popular and become the stronger one, even if not canon in of itself. See what I'm trying to put down right there?
Mm-hmm. The mimetic mutation, I think, is the TV tropes page. Yeah.
Fair enough. But yeah, it just seems like almost when I see all these characters, like even the comedy, it deals with the disharmony in which you change a character in a certain way to gain comedic effect, and it's designed because people just like it's not who that character is, and that's why it's funny.
Anybody else? Blake, what was your question? What was your
my first, it was kind of a follow-up from my first question, because when I first asked what I did was because the assertion he made about the intent of the movie. So when he said the intent didn't matter, that was kind of like not what I meant. Because he first said that the movie was, he saw it was clearly made as an official acceptance of the fan interpretation of the characters, right? So I feel that when you just say, oh, the author doesn't matter as well, your read of the show becomes inherently about the database, right? So the Western fandom seems more like it cares about the grand narrative because we also care about the author and what they were trying to do, right? When he talked about the wiki,
yeah,
the Western wiki, yeah. So that seems very much about caring about the grand narrative.
Yeah.
And when they were talking about the narrative, that wiki, they were talking about what did the author want to make here.
I'm sad we didn't get a chance to explore the database a lot more, actually, because there's a lot of good stuff there to think about and talk about.
Yeah. So the Western fandom seems more like they care about the grand narrative because they care about the original intent. So if you do care about that, then you could say that it was being created, Madoka was being created with a grand narrative in mind. And officially, it does have that grand narrative.
Yeah.
And I think it's clear if you look into what the creators have done before. So that's the assertion that he made about Madoka being officially not about the grand narrative. I think that was mistaken. Even if
I don't think he said anything about it.
And I tried to counter that. I did try and head that off and say, Madoka does have a grand narrative. It does have her narrative.
Yeah, it definitely does. Like, no, but it's still all the way up to Rebellion. They still were trying to make it, even if the fans didn't, right? Like, I'm totally all for seeing how the fans have taken it and just the author like being one possible view, right? Like, that's fine. But I do think it was being made with the idea of a grand narrative, and it still is being made like that.
I don't think he was talking about an official way of or reason it was made. He was just saying like. Oh
no, he did say it was being made. It was a tacit acceptance of the fans' interpretation over the official one, I guess.
That's not like officially primarily the reason. I didn't interpret it that way, at least. I just said that's like one aspect is how I interpret it. Also, he was more talking about like the meta aspect of the fake city being in Homer's head, but still being recognizable, even though it's not actually the characters. It's how she sees the characters.
Yeah, I wasn't even going there.
Yeah,
he went there.
That I'm okay with. Yeah.
That I think is mostly his point there.
But he did say explicitly like it was an acceptance of the database.
That's what.
But I don't agree that what his implication was that is the main thing it's trying to do.
No, well, probably not the main one, but he did say that. That was my objection. Just to that statement.
Yeah, but I think it was intentional by the creators, and I think the same thing about Rei Ayanami being a clone. I think that's exactly intended as this kind of thing where you're taking these characters in different ways here. We're going to put that actually in the canon story that they're being taken in different ways.
Yeah, no, that part of the
You know,
that seems fine. I don't think it was actually done there based on how Inakuri did it, but yeah, that's fine.
I also think you get a bit of stage fright there, Blake.
Everyone does.
Yeah, I didn't want to talk. I said I don't want to talk. I told you I don't want to talk.
Tom, you got something to say? Come on.
yeah, you know, it's kind of funny that you mentioned that, like, that you know, Rei Ayanami is a clone and that she can be seen in many different ways. When I know that, like, for example, on like, you know, the most how do you say, the most zealous fans of Rei, like, completely deny the idea that she's a clone. Like, they're completely opposed to that idea.
Yeah,
and that's kind of what I'm referring to when I talk about this conflict between, like, the database and, like, how that's seen in the Western fandom, in the sense that fans of Rei Ayanami see a need, at least in the Eva fan base, to legitimize her as a character in that way,
and I'm
to
glad
make her a singleness.
I'm glad we brought that up in the thing when we talked about, you know, how a character's agency versus the character's, you know, being reduced to traits, and the fact that some people are absolutely okay with that and some people just aren't, and the division of that between East and West, and that's what a big part of Beautiful Fighting Girl was for me. That Tamaki says that the real otakus are able to honestly parse these different things and not have any trouble with it at all. And that's how I feel. I can deal with, you know, slutty Haruhi in the dojins. That doesn't bother me at all. I can still appreciate, you know, honest to God Haruhi in the official works. And I'm glad we talked a bit about more about that, because that's the really interesting thing, I think, or one of them.
So actually, to sort of chime in on this, is that I feel one of the reasons the Western anime fandom is like this is because, particularly in the United States, this problem has been something that people have been dealing with for decades, like back to World War II. And one of the key ideas is that you get comic books, because we have superheroes, and these superheroes have been around. I mean, you can look at Captain America and Superman, like defeating Hitler. They were written during World War II at those times, and yet they have continued throughout the ages. Multiple, like probably hundreds of people have gotten their hands over them. They've been adapted over in movies and comics and all that kind of stuff. And so we've already had to get to the idea, and I think the Western fandom has sort of settled that there is something core about these characters, that there is something like specific and absolute. There could be variants, but it can only go to so much a degree. And that's why I think even approaching the anime fandom, the people in the United States or people in the West are trying to figure out, like, what is this, like, baseline, like what is 80% of the character we can allow for 20% variance.
Yeah.
But it seems in Japan they don't even really care about that, in which they're much more leeway in letting their characters completely change. While, I mean, you can't, there's a, like, if you change Captain America too much, people don't even recognize him as Captain America. Like, he has to be, like, patriotic. If you get rid of his patriotism, then he's no longer Captain America.
Tamaki brings up the Disney princesses in that regard, that you don't have any variance there. They just are what they are, and you can't see them in another way.
Yeah, and I think another interesting point about, like, that whole mess about comic books. I think in the West, at least, we also have a bit of a lot of concern for like a degree of what you might call, like, separation. So, like, for example, like as a fan of Eva, like, I can read Eva Dojins and I don't care, because that's something that's separated from the main work. Whereas things like the rebuild of Evangelion bother me, because that's made by the original creator, and you know, that's something that's being sold as, like, a fully legitimate part of Eva. And
Gotcha.
the inconsistencies in that story, and the like
Rebuilds.
dislike for that story is bigger because it's more connected to the franchise.
I think I prefer the rebuilds over retake or anything.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not talking about those kind of doujins, like the
Yeah.
rewrite ones. I'm just talking about like, yeah.
What about like the Ayanami Racing project, which was also official?
Yeah, I know.
That
That's
is an
weird.
interesting, yeah.
What is that?
See, but I still think that has a degree of separation, right? Because it's like I don't think Gainax was ever selling it as like this is Neon Genesis Evangelion.
Well,
it's
the
just,
thing
it's
is,
like
I don't
a
think they
full
care.
thing. Yeah, that's true. They might not even care
Yeah.
at all.
They got
But
fast.
They're just
that's
selling their
why
product, their
Yeah.
characters.
That's why I can accept something like that at the very least, and not really care about it.
And that's the age we're in, you know, the age of mass communications, where everybody has a shot at making something official, and the fan works are just as valuable as the other works. And boy, the fans have an input into. There's no gatekeepers anymore, or there are fewer gatekeepers, less barriers, and that's just
Going back to comic books, though, aren't we in that same place right now? Because like people writing comic books right now, they're fans as well. They're just made official. It's actually kind of very similar,
You're
right?
very
Just
true.
officialized fan one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I mean,
uh,
and so I'll agree. Yeah, there are changes in the and so yeah, comic book creators now have been fans of comic books and all that stuff. But there are disagreements, and you'll see that there is a much more vocal pushback. Like one of the key things I can think about is, and like the most recent incarnation of Batman Beyond, which is a series I really enjoy, is that they changed the main character where they made like Tim Drake into Batman Beyond, and there hasn't been pushback because like a creator tried to take it a certain way, try to sort of establish something new, and then fans didn't really like it. And so I don't see that being what's going to happen. And like you see these starts and stops where you can look at mini starts and stops where creators have tried to take characters certain ways, and then it doesn't work out. It's not financially successful, and so then they get pushed back, and then they try to refine themselves.
Yeah. Anybody else? Any thoughts?
Just about like what you pick and choose to be official and what you think is just like an add-on, like a doujin. It seems like obviously very arbitrary that you just say, okay, I feel like this is too distanced from the original work, that you consider it just an add-on, like what a doujin would be, like going back to the racing project, like that was official, but you kind of just pick and choose what you want in your own narrative, what you want for your own characters.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think the idea I think the term official, if you're trying to refer to something I was saying, I guess I think that was off. And the idea, especially with anime, you can't say that another person's interpretation is wrong. It's just that there are processes in which certain interpretations become the main ones, in which they become, I guess, what mimetic memes or whatever we call them. And so certain ideas gain favor and certain ideas sort of fall out, and they just had that one work that they were in, and no one else tries to copy it. But then other ideas come along and people start copying that, and so then there is an evolution within the fan base of what they feel a character should be. And so there is like this informal process in which a community tends to define characters along certain routes. And so there tend to be more accepted views, to the point where you could probably name maybe like a handful of accepted views, and then there's some way out there views that no one really keeps around. It's just you have to look hard to be able to find that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it was Tom who was talking about his issues with the rebuilds because they were official but strayed from the original work, but saw the Dojin like racing project as not official, even though they both come from the official outlet. Was that you, Tom?
Yeah, it was me.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
Do I need to respond to something? I haven't been paying attention.
It was just going back to that you just arbitrarily pick what you think is like official enough to fit the narrative.
Yeah.
Because to me the rebuilds, I mean they're as much their own entity as any other doujin is, so I don't really care about any inconsistencies it may have with the original work, because I mean it's not the original work. So So everything else is kind of its own line, like Simon was talking about. So you can just see in its own context.
Yeah, and I think that's true that everybody has their amount of variance that they're okay with, and then past that, it's like, well, I don't buy into this. But I think Phaeton had a good point about the community as a whole generally sets those expectations and gives you a lot of that information sometimes.
It might be a little far-fetched, but you can. I haven't really thought this through, but you can maybe extend it to like in-show inconsistencies, where some fans will watch an episode of a show and a character might act out of character, and they'll make these mental leaps to kind of justify it or just do away with it entirely to
Yeah.
make it fit the canon they have in mind. So that's kind of the same thing as having a doujin that may have another side to a character, and you may want to add that to your view of the character, or you can dismiss it, but you can also do it in the same show, like in the same line.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I gotta agree with you there. I mean, I guess the only thing I'm really curious about now after this discussion, which hopefully the group, I guess everyone here can sort of push forward later, is just what is going to be the difference between like Western anime fandom and then Japanese anime fandom. Because I guess it really came out here that there's a much bigger divide than I really thought of. And even how we approach these characters is much more different than I was expecting.
Boy, yeah.
How long was this interview? I came in. I don't know if I came in late, but it was pretty short.
Yeah, I came in a little late.
It
It was an hour long.
It started exactly at 8, and he had to leave exactly after an hour, so we ended exactly at 9.
Ah, yeah, that was short.
Yeah. It's up on YouTube. I'll post a link on the subreddit.
Oh shit, was this live?
Bro, you're being recorded right now. Holy shit.
Oh fuck.
Wait,
Right?
where's
Gotta
the
hide
show
my
being
identity.
recorded?
If it makes you feel any better, nobody was watching. And
Yeah,
nobody
that's right.
probably will watch except for people on the subreddit.
That's true.
This guy is a bad internet celebrity, and he has no fans.
I have hundreds of
I
views.
was on a podcast one and it's
Hey,
on
I'm
listening
Kai's
to it
fan.
so bad.
Yeah, I'm subscribed to Kai too. But you know,
Cool.
Oh
I
shit.
subscribed and I unsubscribed.
Yeah, I was
Yeah,
just gonna
I
say
thought
that.
we were not recorded anymore.
What
I
is
thought
it
it
like?
was over.
They got like duty chocolate, so this is like a duty subscription.
I don't like this. I
Please.
was talking because I thought no one would see this.
See? We're gonna get you
all
out of
get
that.
a Madoka,
yeah, the stage
Dami
fright.
Dama
Come on.
Kuriya.
Yeah, no. But I can stop recording if you guys want. I'm probably gonna go play
I don't care.
video games or watch anime or something or what.
It's
Yeah.
3 a.m. I gotta
Who
go to
hasn't
bed.
watched Drifters?
I
haven't.
haven't.
I haven't.
Are we doing a Drifters watch? Drifters watch.
Yeah,
You're gonna hate it. Just,
What is this show?
just from
Hyper
what I've
drifting.
seen, you're
Dude,
gonna hate it.
it's all action.
It's not on my radar. Should I just not watch it?
Oh,
It's
it's
all
just
action.
blood.
You hate action.
It's hell singing
action.
from what I understand.
Yeah,
Also,
Yeah.
this doujinshi, oh man, I cannot find it for the life of me.
Really?
I think I found the artist.
Maybe it's not like.
Well, even then, for like doujinshi, you have to realize that there is a selection process for like which ones get uploaded.
Oh,
and which
I'm
ones even
aware.
get translated.
But you know, people scan shit. There's always the off chance that they did.
Bro, you gotta go to one of those shops where they sell them in Japan. Holy fuck, dude. It's just like rows and rows packed to the ceiling with doujinshi. Just erotic, not erotic, whatever you want, sorted by like author's name and type.
That'd
And
have been fun,
Boy,
holy,
my dream.
you gotta go. You gotta go.
I like that the employees in those doujin shops that they usually wear masks so they aren't recognized. And usually like girls, young girls running around with masks, trying not to be identified.
Oh yeah, I was on the yaoi floor. That was interesting.
Oh yeah, those floors are just giant, even in Book Off.
All right, I'm gonna head off, but thank you all for attending. It was great, and I'll post a video.
yeah, bye, Kai.
Later.
Bye.